the mental health crisis that we see today all over the country is growing and very serious. And I know I have personal connections to this, and all of you have personal connections to this. I think one of the reasons maybe why we don't see a huge crowd is this is a tough topic for people to talk about. But unless we start talking about this and addressing it head on, we're not going to continue to do the major improvements we need for especially our youth. So I'm very excited about the opportunity tonight to bring this to all of you. And I'm going to turn it back to Josh to talk about the great speaker that we have tonight.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Before we get started, I also want to acknowledge we're at Rockwell Park, which is beautiful and historic. I want to thank our parks crew for their work in continuing to make this a beautiful space for everyone to enjoy. I also want to acknowledge our entire staff team, many of which are here. Everyone that's in the shirts, if you guys want to just stand up and raise your hand while you're eating. Folks have worked really hard coordinating all the details, so I want to make sure that they get acknowledged. Again, if you haven't gotten food, please be sure to visit the food truck. If you haven't gotten a shirt, please feel free to see us up front and we'll get you any of the colors you'd like. But without further ado, I'm excited to introduce Wes Woodson. He's a nationally renowned speaker, he's an author, and he's a mental health advocate and champion, and we're really lucky to have him here in Bristol, all the way from Boston. Give it up for Wes.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. How are we doing? Sorry, I love high energy. How are we doing? That's awesome. So, my name is Wes. I'm coming all the way from Boston, Massachusetts, and I imagine you have a boatload of questions. See, my goal tonight is simple. I want to help everyone in this space learn how to have unapologetic conversations around mental health. And before we even get started, I want to give everyone here a round of applause for coming out tonight, because this is a very challenging topic, so please give yourself a round of applause. Thank you. Now, before we actually get started, I want to do a very interesting exercise. If you're sitting next to somebody, I want you to look at them, wait, for a second, look at someone. Now, for the next 30 seconds, without making any noises, look at that person who's sitting next to you, make direct eye contact, look them up and down, check them out. I know it's how weird. No noise. No noise. Yeah, look them up and down. I know it's going to be very awkward. Deep into their eyes. Don't fall in love now. All right, come back to me. Now, my question to everyone here, was that fun? Was that weird? Was it awkward? It was awkward. Now, I did that intentionally because having mental health conversations can be awkward. In fact, my mission in my life as a professional public speaker is to eradicate the shame that exists around having mental health conversations. And how I do that is through storytelling. So for me, I travel all around the country sharing my story because for me, I spent most of my years hiding my mental health challenges because I felt so embarrassed to tell anyone. So tonight, I'm gonna share my story with all of you, and at the end there'll be time for questions and comments, but if there aren't any questions I can't answer because I'm not a therapist, I want everyone here to know you have wonderful, wonderful resources here in this space to actually support you or someone you know who could be going through a mental health challenge. Okay, that sound good? Awesome. So my story, it starts in a very small suburban town called Sharon, Massachusetts. No one ever really knows where that is. I always say it's that town next to Gillette Stadium where the Patriots play football. Go Pats. We're not going to be very good this year. That's a whole different story. But for me, growing up in this town, I always felt different. See, I'm the youngest of three. I have two older siblings, Mikey and Shannon. See, Mikey and Shannon, they loved me unconditionally and hated me conditionally because I was the world's biggest, most annoying younger sibling. I did everything I could possibly think of to make Mikey and Shannon's life a living chaos. And for instance, my older sister, Shannon, she had these like Beanie Babies, these stuffed animals. So when I was younger, I would break into her room with a pair of scissors and I would cut the heads off all the stuffed animals. But even worse, Mikey, my older brother, he had this like rare collection of Pokemon cards. So when I was a kid, I cannot make this up, I would go into his room, steal those Pokemon cards, bring them to school, and I would sell them to my friends for $1. I made 50 bucks in one day. But anyways, I move on. Now, Mikey and Shannon, obviously, as you can imagine, they hated my guts. And they went to my mom and dad, and they would say all of these things like, Wes did this, Wes did that, you should punish Wes. But they didn't know that, honestly, I had a secret. You see, I actually believed I was the favorite of the three, which really meant I could do anything I want and I would never get in trouble. In fact, in my mind, the story I was telling myself was, I am the coolest kid in the world because my parents would never put me on timeout. Now, my mom and dad, they're a very big part of my mental health story. My parents met for the first time, they were 15 years old. They got married 10 years after that. And when they got married, they had this idea, this dream for my life, Mikey's life, and Shannon's life. I think about this dream, many people have many different names for this dream. Some might call it the American dream. Some might call it being really successful in life. But my parents, they always called it the plan. And the plan, it had this whole look to it. See, the plan involved moving outside the city of Boston to in the middle of nowhere suburban town called Sharon. And in fact, it involved in this town having all these rules. Like you had to look a certain way, like you had to talk a certain way, you had to dress a certain way, which is why I always tell kids and people, whoever I share my story with, I am the youngest kid in the world to ever dress like a 65-year-old grandpa. I was wearing a shirt and tie by the age of 5, but honestly, that was intentional. Because my parents, they wanted everything to look a certain way. And I use this analogy that my life was like an optical illusion. Even now, when all of you look at me right now, you probably think one thing about me. He's energetic, he's happy, he's smiling, but none of you could probably see what's really happening under this t-shirt. I'm sweating profusely. I'm challenging all of these negative self-talk, these negative self-thoughts. In fact, I use this image of a swan. Now, by a show of hands, anyone here ever seen a swan before? You think about a swan, though, hold that image in your mind. It's like this bird that kind of has like this effortless, almost perfect glide to it. And if you were to meet me when I was younger, you would think my life was that. This effortless glide of going back and forth, back and forth. I grew up in a nice town. I grew up in a family that loved me, and my sibling hated me a little bit. I played all these different sports. You would think there was nothing wrong with me. But hold that same image of a swan, and you would think it might look so well put together, but the real photo of the swan that no one ever really talks about. See, that photo looks like this. It might look so well put together on the surface, but then underneath it's like pedaling almost uncontrollably just to keep afloat. And that image, if you can really picture it in your brain, represents mental health challenges. See, challenges with our mental health, they're not things you always can see. They're not things you always can hear, like a cough. Instead, they're things that you feel. Oftentimes beneath the surface, oftentimes behind closed doors, oftentimes when you really believe I'm the only person in the world to ever feel like this. And for me, that was who I was. I was pedaling every single day of my life just to keep afloat. But my pedaling, it didn't look like what you're probably thinking about. See, my pedaling looked like this. It involved anxiety. See, for me, I was always thinking when I was a younger kid, what does everyone else think about me? Am I dressed the right way? Do I smell the right way? Am I tall enough? Am I smart enough? I had all these thoughts in my head that wouldn't stop. But there was like this one thought. You see, because of that shame of having these weird feelings, I didn't want to tell anybody. And behind closed doors, I had this one thought that would never stop reoccurring in my head. And this one thought, it was a question. Now, I'm sure all of us here have asked ourselves this question once or twice in our own lives. And that question was this: am I good enough? And like that singular question drove all of this unpleasant, negative behavior. And I think the first time I asked myself the question of, am I good enough? You see, that was all the way in like 3rd grade. And in third grade, I felt different. Now everyone here knows that feeling of being different. Like maybe at your place of work, you're that one coworker that talks a lot. If you don't think you are, you probably are. Hey, maybe you're the one at your coworker's space that actually is probably too tall or too short. See, I felt different, not because of those reasons. See, all the way in school, I felt different because of my test scores. I'll never forget it. I grew up in a small suburban town in Massachusetts. We took this thing called the MCAS. It's like this standardized test. I have no idea what those 4 letters stand for. It really felt like a different set of 4-letter words, but I'm not gonna mention that right now. And for me taking this test, it was terrible for me because every time I took this test, my body would always go through like this weird, unpleasant change. My stomach would feel very uncomfortable. My chest would get extremely tight. I'd get really sweaty under my armpits. I'd have like this weird chill dancing up and on the back of my spine. And honestly, it felt like the walls around me were closing in on me and I couldn't really focus on my exam. And I remember when I was a kid, I described this feeling as the inescapable roller coaster because it felt like I was on a ride at Six Flags that I couldn't get off of. But on top of that, I had this voice in my head. And this voice, no one could hear it but me. And that voice would say things like, Wes, it can't be C 5 times in a row. Or, Wes, everyone's on the next page, you're still stuck writing your name. Or, Wes, the fire alarm might go off and the water's gonna rain all over your paper and you're gonna fail the entire exam. Like, what if this and what if that? And I called that voice in my head, I called him Ace. And the thing about Ace, he had this weird way of telling me stories about myself that I didn't like. Now, I think all of us in this room have a version of that Ace, that version of that voice of ourselves that are probably telling all of these negative things about ourselves. In fact, Ace and this roller coaster, they would always combine to create this pattern of me taking a test and failing the test, taking a test and failing the test. And one day, my teacher in third grade, Miss T, she pulled me aside and she goes like, Wes, I think it's time to invite your mom and dad in for a parent-teacher conference. In fact, Wes, I want you at that meeting too. And I kid you not, I looked back at that lady like she had 5 heads on her shoulders. I thought I was gonna be so much in trouble. I really thought this was like to be the end of my life. But then in that meeting, it was me, my mom, my dad, and Miss T. And Miss T starts talking. And deep down inside, I'm back on that roller coaster, and Ace, he's in my head telling me all of these like negative things, like, Wes, your mom and dad are finally gonna see you're a failure. But then in that meeting, Miss T, my teacher, she told my parents I had this thing. I never heard of these 2 words in my life. She goes like, we think that Wes has test anxiety. And I had never heard of test anxiety. But when I learned more about it, she explained it as this excessive sense of worry when it came time to take tests. And it was like she gave a piece of vocabulary for me and my parents to finally learn how to better manage these unpleasant feelings. So when she explained all of these things, she even told my mom and dad, look, just because Wes learns differently doesn't mean he can't learn at all. In fact, Miss T told my parents that I was gonna get all this specialized help. And for me, I thought I was the coolest kid in the world. I was gonna get all of this extra time, a different test, a smaller classroom, a whole different teacher. They were even gonna give me mints while I'm taking my test. And I'm like, damn, if this was like having a test anxiety, why doesn't everyone have test anxiety? I thought it was the coolest thing ever. But I'll never forget it. One day, I go after class to finish my exam, and I'm in this small room, and I go back to hand my exam to Miss T. Now, in this classroom, my best friend, Brian, he had this like weird look on his face. I'll never forget it. His face was like, Wes, what are you doing? So he called me over, and I walk over to Brian. I'm like, what's up? And he's like, Wes, why did you leave the classroom? We just took a test. Why did you miss our exam? And I was right back at Brian with all the confidence in the world. I'm like, Brian, I have test anxiety. You should get it too. You get all of these extra things, extra time, a whole different teacher. They're giving out mints. But his face, It didn't change. Brian told me, and the reason why I'm bringing this story up, Brian told me the kids in my class started to talk. They were saying things like, Wes is too stupid for the same test we have, so Wes goes to an outside class for a different test. How many of us, you don't have to raise your hand, how many of us know that person, or maybe it's you yourself, who might have felt so different, or might have felt that no one understood you, that they kind of alienated you? Because for me, when I felt alienated, I had this idea that what if I could just convince everyone that I don't have this thing? What if I can convince everyone who knew me I don't have test anxiety? So that started in 3rd grade, but as I got older, I had all these different ideas to suppress my anxiety, to avoid that public shame of having test anxiety. And I'll never forget it. The first day of middle school, I had this wonderful idea. See, I had a crush on this girl. I won't tell you her name. Screw it, Alex Miller. I had a crush on Alex Miller. And for me, I did not want Alex Miller knowing I had test anxiety. So I took all my saved up birthday money and I went to the one place in the world where everyone goes to reinvent themselves. I went to the mall. Now my idea was at the mall, I was gonna buy jeans, shirts, cologne. I mean, everything my money could buy, because my plan was I was gonna show everyone how cool I actually thought I was. Now in my mind, I went to Abercrombie and Fitch. Now I was going for Abercrombie and Fitch model, but what I really got was Carlton for Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And I just cringe at this. I mean, if you can imagine this in your mind, we all have that one photo of ourselves we don't want any of our friends seeing, and that was definitely mine. Now for me, it didn't just stop with that. It never does. You see, I did not want to feel that feeling, so I had another idea. I'm thinking, what if I ran for class president? What if I ran for student council? I have all the cool clothes. No one's going to see me as the kid with test anxiety. So I go back home. I'm having all these ideas for campaign slogans. Now that same year, I learned what plagiarism is. And that same year, I plagiarized Barack Obama. Let me explain. His campaign slogan was, yes, we can. So I know what I did next. I made it Wes we can, and I won. I won the class election. I felt on top of the world. I'm thinking I have everyone who knows me. I have all y'all fooled. I mean, I have the test scores. No one's going to know about that. I have the cool clothes. I have the student council. I mean, everything on the outside looks well put together. But then that same year, these white spots started to appear on my skin. Now, you probably can't see from where you are, but I still have these spots today on my hands, different parts of my body. Doctors call this vitiligo. It's this rare skin disease that causes white spots to appear all throughout your body. It's the same thing Michael Jackson had. And for me, having vitiligo, now it's gonna be actual proof that something's wrong with me. And you might not have white spots on your hands. Maybe you don't think you're pretty enough. Maybe you don't think you're in the best of shape. Maybe you don't even think you're smart enough. I mean, we all have that one thing about ourselves that we're kind of insecure about. And for me, I hated my spots. And the thing in my mind, I'm like, who do I talk to? My friends? They're calling me all kinds of names. Who do I go to? My siblings, Mikey and Shannon? They're in a whole different state at college. Who do I go to? My mom and my dad, my parents, to talk about this? My parents are going through a very messy divorce. And honestly, I mean, I had really no idea who I could talk to. And it felt like my whole life, as I knew it, from being bullied in school and having my parents arguing at home, having police come to my house twice a week to break up fights, it felt like my entire life was always just on fire. And I always found myself stuck right in the middle. But if I'm not lying to anyone here, there was one thing I could use to make all of this go away. And this one thing for me, it was like my true, honest, escape plan. It wouldn't be going on a shopping spree at Abercrombie and Fitch. It wouldn't be trying to run for another student council position. See, that one thing for me was basketball. Now, basketball was everything for me. Because when I played basketball, it was all these unpleasant feelings went away. I mean, the spots didn't matter. Ace, he wasn't loud enough. I mean, it was just me, the ball, and the hoop, and it felt like the world just kind of froze, and I could just be Wes. And I think all of us have that one version or that one thing that we like to do to kind of have that sense of escapism. Like maybe for you, it's getting a nice glass of wine and watching Grey's Anatomy. Or maybe for others, it's going for a spa day or going for a nice shopping day at the mall. But for me, it was basketball. And every time I played basketball, it was like everything was just okay. No one asked about the spots. No one asked about the anxiety. But every time I played basketball, as we all know it to be a very healthy activity, it was one of the most unhealthiest things I ever did in my life. Because every time I played this sport, this vicious cycle would happen. My anxiety would be triggered by a bad test score, my parents arguing back at home, my friends, I mean, honestly, calling all these kinds of names, and I would just use basketball to convince everyone that nothing's wrong with me, I'm okay. I would avoid all of these unpleasant feelings, and I'm not gonna lie to you, that avoidance of playing basketball, it would offer some short-term relief, but then over time, that anxiety, it always just grew. And when it came back, it always came back 10 times stronger. And this loop that you can imagine, it continued all through the rest of middle school. When I got to high school, I had this great idea. I'm thinking, what if this time I don't change my friends, I don't change my clothes? What if this time I change my entire school? It was a part of this wishful thinking. If I could just change my environment, maybe my anxiety would just go away. I don't have to talk about it with anybody. So I transferred to this all-boys private Catholic high school. Now my plan was, at this Catholic high school, I was gonna use basketball to convince everyone who knew me that I'm the next LeBron James. Y'all, I am not the next LeBron James. My jump shot is trash. I'm skinnier than a pig. I'm nowhere near that. But for me, I'm thinking that basketball and at this new school and no one really knows me, it's gonna work. So I make the basketball team, and I'm thinking my plan's finally in motion. But then the very first game, I'm in a locker room by myself, throwing up in this trash can, sweating uncontrollably, shaking profusely. And all those feelings I spent years depending on basketball to run from, now they're following me here too. In fact, Ace, he's telling me all of these things like, Wes, everyone's faster than you, everyone's stronger than you, just quit. So I did. I quit basketball. In fact, I tried going back a year later, and I snapped my knee in 2 places, and that ended my competitive career. And the reason why I say that is because my parents, their plan for me was not to be an all-star athlete, they wanted me to be an all-star student. So they put me in these very challenging classes. Now, by a show of hands, has anyone been in a conversation and someone's talking to you and you have no idea what they're saying? You just kind of checked out. For me, I was in this math class and Mr. S, my teacher, he was this old guy with these rectangular glasses, and he's saying all these mathematical terms like y equals mx plus b, and I'm sitting there thinking, why don't you shut up? And no one can really tell, but I'm back on that roller coaster and Ace is in my head telling me all these weird stories. Wes, everyone's gonna finally see that you're a failure. I mean, you don't belong in this class, Wes. But then actually, Mr. S, that teacher, he saw the same pattern that Miss T saw all the way in 3rd grade. He would see me take a test and fail a test, take a test and fail a test. And one day he pulled me aside and he told me one of the best things you could tell anyone who'd be going through a mental health challenge. 3 words: you are enough. I never had anyone, never mind a teacher, telling me that I was enough. I could barely tell myself that, which is why I went through this cycle of depending on external things to fill this internal void. In fact, now that I bring it up, there was this one other person who told me that you are enough. And this one other person, it was not another teacher, it wasn't a coach. You see, this one other person, I met her when I was 12 years old. We'd hang out once a week. Does anyone have a guess who this person is? Any guesses? You shout it out, I can hear you. Any guesses? My grandmother? Nope, not my grandmother. Anyone else? Sorry? Somebody at church? Nope, not that. My dog? If it could talk, I hope. But yes. Anyone else? One more guess. Sorry? A mentor, you're getting closer. It was my therapist. My therapist actually told me I was enough. In fact, through my life, I've had 7 different therapists before I found the right one. And finding the right therapist one I could trust and relate to has always been like the story of Goldilocks, right? You know the story of Goldilocks? The little girl who commits a crime that's never addressed in the story, move on, sees 3 bowls of porridge, tries one, it's too cold, second one, it's too hot, last one, it's just right. And the reason I want to focus on 3, because these 3 therapists that I had, they actually helped me understand that honestly, it takes time to find that right therapist you can trust. Like my first therapist, Miss Carroll. If she was that bowl of porridge, Miss Carroll, she would be too cold. Because honestly, Miss Carroll, she was too old. She was dusty. She was always trying to tell me how to think and how to feel. And I always say that therapy is not supposed to be like that. It could be this wonderful experience, helps you understand why you feel the way you feel, and help you learn better ways to manage these unpleasant feelings. So I didn't give up on therapy. I found my second therapist, Sarah. Now, Sarah, if she was like that bowl of porridge, she would be too hot. And I'm not talking about her appearance. She was always trying to fix me. And I felt judged by Sarah. I couldn't really trust Sarah. And that's when I found my third therapist, Erin. Now, Erin, if she was like that bowl of porridge, she would be just right. Erin, she was young, she knew what TikTok was, she knew what Fortnite was, she knew what all the stuff I was listening to. I was like, whoa, this person was amazing. But honestly, the real thing that made Erin so amazing was she listened to me. And sometimes, when people think that how they can help someone going through a very emotionally challenging time, they think they want to fix it. But Erin, she just listened to me. And I met Erin when I was in college. And I'm not gonna lie to anyone here, I was in college by myself for the first time in my life. I'm thinking, I'm going out. So I went out to this college party. I see this cute girl see me in the party. Now I'm looking at her, see me, see her, and she saw me look at her, and she kind of did this like weird look on her face. And I actually took out my phone, and I did that one thing that all college guys do when they see a cute girl in person. I walked away. And honestly, I'm thinking this girl, she's gonna be so amazing. I ended up seeing her in class the next day, and we became friends. And our friendship, I remember it like sped up. Before I knew it, I'm telling this girl all of these things like, I love you, you're my everything, you're so perfect. Now, whenever I present in schools, students are always like, Wes, what the heck were you thinking? Why would you tell this girl I love you? Why would you drop the 3-word sentence no one's ever supposed to say on the first date? Well, honestly, I told her that because she was telling me 3 words I couldn't tell myself. You are enough. In fact, this girl who I met in college, she's walking me to and from class, surprising me after class on my favorite snacks, doing all my favorite activities. I'm literally calling my mom on the phone like, yo, Ma, I found the one. And I'm thinking this person's gonna be my everything until one night. One night we got into an argument. And I know that couples, I know that friends argue, but this argument was different. You see, this argument led me to be sitting in a police station, staring at a police officer in the face like this. And that police officer looked at me, and I looked back at him, and he told me the worst news of my life. He goes like, Wes, do you understand you become a victim of domestic violence tonight? I didn't understand. He was like, Wes, you understand you were in an unhealthy, abusive relationship, right? I didn't understand. See, all those years of suppressing my anxiety and turning into external things to fill that internal void, it made me blind to all of this person's red flags. I had no idea about the gaslighting, the manipulation, the fact that I was isolated from my friends. I had no time for my friends. I spent all my time with her. She had total control over my personal schedule, knew where I was at every single minute of the day. And honestly, who would I talk to about that? In fact, the entire time I was dating this person, I was just stuck in that anxiety loop. Now, when my partner at the time was arrested before my eyes and I never saw her again, Ace, my anxiety came back in this different fashion. So this time, Ace, he was more aggressive. He's saying things like, Wes, if you don't have her in your life, you'll have no one else ever again. Wes, if you tell anyone what happened to you, no one's going to believe you. And I'm thinking 3 years ago to the day, I'm thinking, Ace is right. I mean, how do I tell my best friends my girlfriend hit me? How do I tell my siblings, Mikey and Shannon, my girlfriend hit me? How do I look my mom and my dad in the face and tell my girlfriend will be 1 year and a half, lock me in the room for 10 minutes, and hit me? At that point, I'm believing I'll never be enough for anybody. And I thought it'd be a lot easier if I wasn't here anymore. Normally when I present, I have a slideshow behind me and I would show this photo. And this photo, I'm going to describe it to you. It was photos taken of me hanging out with my friends one night. We went out to a college party and they asked me for a group photo. And in that photo, I'm smiling, kind of like this. And if you look at that photo, you can imagine it. You would think, nothing's wrong with him. He looks well put together. But no one knew that 2 days before that photo was taken, I had thought about taking my own life. And it was not that I wanted to die. I had no idea to continue living with this feeling of nothingness. But there was one thing that saved my life. And that one thing for me, it wasn't basketball. It wasn't changing my outward appearance. It wasn't even changing my schools. See, that one thing for me was music. And music had this way of telling me stories about myself that I needed to hear. In fact, the lowest point in my life, there was one song playing on my phone. Now, I'm not sure if anyone here knows this song. It goes like this. I've on the low, I've been taking my time. I feel like I'm out of my mind. Does anyone know that song by Show Hands with Cheers?
Yeah.
Who sings it? Who sings it?
I don't know.
Logic. It's not, but yeah, fair enough.
I know the
it's
name
called
of it.
1-800-273-8255. Again, that's 1-800-273-8255. Now, I heard this song 1,000 times, but I actually never knew what that number, 1-800-273-8255, actually was. And I Googled it, and I found out that number is the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. And I asked myself, what would happen if I called? Now, I'm thinking, who's going to answer? I mean, should I give them a fake name? Is my mom going to find out? But I called. I remember this lady named Janice answered the phone. Now, I've never met Janice before in real life like this. But 43 minutes and 15 seconds, and yes, I remember the exact timestamp. I told Janice everything. I told her about third grade. I told her about Wes Woodson in middle school and my cool clothes, or my attempt at dressing cool. I told her about basketball and breaking my knee. I told her about the spots on my hand, just like I'm telling all of you right now, including the domestic violence. And that was like the first time I could ever tell someone about how much I was struggling. But at the end of that call, Janice told me something I had never heard in my life. And one of the best things you could say to someone too, is that it's okay to not be okay. And it was like in that moment I had permission to take off this mask that I was hiding for so long. I mean, it's okay to not be okay. And that really changed everything for me. The next day I went back to Erin, the therapist. I'm telling Erin I'm having all of these dangerous suicidal thoughts. And I told my therapist this, and then she told me to go to the hospital. And I looked back at this lady, I'm like, for what? Like, I'm thinking you go to the hospital for like an ache, like a bruise, a cough, a scar, things you can see, things you can hear, not things you feel. But she told me to go. And I remember that day I actually walked into the ER. I met this doctor, and I told him the same thing I told Janice, the same thing I told Erin, the same thing I'm telling all of you right now. And honestly, the doctor looked back at me, and he gave me 3 options. 1, Wes, I can give you some medication, send you back to Erin, the therapist, to help these very dangerous suicidal thoughts. 2, I can invite you to live in the hospital in our inpatient program, receiving some intense psychiatric care while living in the hospital. Or 3, Wes, I can have you go to an outpatient program where you're gonna spend 5 hours a day, 5 days a week in group therapy, learning how to better manage your anxiety. And he looks at me and he's like, what do you wanna do, Wes? So I chose the 3rd option, the outpatient program. I chose that, honestly, for 2 reasons. 1, it allowed me to finish up school in college, and 2, I was gonna meet other students, other people who looked like me, or relatively my age, who had anxiety, who had depression. And I'll never forget it. When I was in group therapy, I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking for the first time in my life, I've never met anyone who had these feelings. I felt validated, but I also learned too that we can all tell our own stories. In fact, telling your story kind of opens up the door for someone else to tell theirs. And that's one of the biggest lessons I want to share with all of you here tonight. In fact, when I was in the outpatient program, I ended up calling it anxiety school. When I was in anxiety school, I was learning all of these like wonderful things. Like the best thing I learned was the fact that how we think impacts how we feel inside, which impacts our actions. But I also learned too that ACE, my anxiety, he doesn't go away just magically. I can't just move to a different town or change different school or change my clothes and ACE will go away. That's not how it works. In fact, I had to learn better ways to manage ACE, healthier ways besides biting my nails or playing basketball excessively. I had to learn healthy coping mechanisms. In fact, those healthy coping mechanisms make up my toolbox. Now, I'm sure all of us here are familiar with the toolbox. If you're not, it's a set of positive things you can do to help you healthily manage your mental health. And things that I use every single day is I love to exercise, I love to lift weights or go for walks. I love to pray and meditate and practice the gift of mindfulness. I actually love to watch Netflix and really do nothing else than log off of social media. I mean, right now I'm actually binging Stranger Things right now. It's a whole different conversation. And honestly, for me, whenever I'm in this moment of practicing mindfulness, I do this wonderful thing that I just want to share with everyone here, what I call 5-7-5. It's a 5-second inhale through the nose, 7-second hold your breath, and then a 5-second exhale. And before I was introduced, I was standing right by that tree doing the 5-7-5, and it helps me stay grounded even right now. And honestly, when I journal too, which also helps me stay grounded, I pick 3 things that I'm grateful for. You see, I call them the magic 3s. I pick one big thing with my family, one very, very small thing like the chain I'm wearing on my neck, or I pick a very in the present moment thing. Like the fact that right now, in front of everyone here, I'm still breathing. Now the last thing in my toolbox that I love so much, and I'm not afraid to admit, especially as a man of color, I see a therapist. And there's nothing wrong with seeing a therapist or talking to a trained professional about these unpleasant feelings. You're not weak, you're not crazy, you're not weird. You're so strong for being vulnerable. And I've used all these things in my toolbox. With time, it's gotten better. And I used to think it would never get better, but it has. I ended up graduating from Babson College, a business school back in Boston. And on this road I'm on, I'm not trying to be perfect anymore. I'm okay with making progress no matter how big or how small that progress actually is. And people always ask me, like, Wes, do you still have anxiety? Is ACE still in your head? Yes, I have anxiety right now. I mean, I'm wearing a pink shirt. You can't see how much I'm sweating right now. But honestly, yes, I still have anxiety. ACE is still a big part of my life. But with that toolbox, with my support system, who I call my dream team, going to therapy consistently, now I know how to better manage ACE. In fact, my support system, my dream team I call them, they consist of my beautiful girlfriend, Katie, my 2 best friends, Cole and Jake. My therapist is who I call my coach, and my toolbox is like my playbook. I love the sports analogies. And for me, when I use all of these things together, I've learned actually 3 things that I want to share with everyone here tonight. 1, you are not weak for getting help. I mean, you're so strong for having these conversations. 2, we're not meant to suffer alone, which is why I'm so grateful all of us are here tonight to have these kinds of conversations. And then 3, and it's one of the best things I have ever been told in my life, and one thing I would love to share with all of you, that you are all enough, just the way that you are. And if no one has ever told you that in your life, hey, I would love for you to never forget the pink guy in their pink shirt, whatever, telling you, you are enough just the way that you are. Because I remember what it felt like to even be in events like this when I was in school and not believe those 3 words, that you are enough just the way that you are. The last thing I want to say tonight before we actually move into the conversational part of this evening, I want to say that if you or a loved one or a relative or someone who you know is going through a very emotionally challenging time, I think it's very important to understand how we can get help. I mean, aside from the wonderful resources we have off to my left, there are actually two wonderful resources I want to talk about. The hotline number, 1-800-273-8255, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. Most don't know this, but as of last July, it was changed to 3 numbers, 988. Similar to 911, helps you remember it easier. And 2, when you text the word help or connect to 741, you actually speak anonymously to a crisis counselor. Because I always say that these resources, as well as the lovely ones who are actually here tonight, they're all here to help you and those who you love better manage their mind. And most importantly, it helps them understand that they are not alone. So thank you for listening to my wonderful story. I appreciate y'all so much. I'd love to hear any questions you have, but thank you. Thank you. Now, I appreciate that so much. I would love to hear if there's any questions, not just about my story, but even about possibly your own story. And the reason why I think this would be a wonderful safe space and opportunity to have these conversations